Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to be able to rise today to speak to our Opposition Day motion. And I do want to thank our leader, the leader of the official opposition, for sharing his time with me today. Let's begin, Mr. Speaker, with a simple question. What is this motion really about? And I do appreciate the comments that came from my honourable colleague, the member from Elmwood Transcona, and he asked a question about why did we introduce this motion and why is it so what would appear to be narrowly focused? But I want to begin by saying that, I'm a big believer that if you're not faithful and honourable in the small things in life, you won't be faithful and honourable in the big things in life. And I believe that same principle applies to us here in the House of Commons. Character is what you do when nobody is watching. Character is what you do when you know that you can get away with it. And so we are calling this specific issue to light. We've been talking about it this last week and the current week that we're in, because we believe that Canadians deserve a Prime Minister who will be faithful and honourable and integrous in those things that look small. So it's not so much about the $200,000, although that is a big amount. But, Mr. Speaker, it's about a Prime Minister who, if he is truly sorry, will follow through on what might look like a small thing, but pay back the money to the taxpayer, because we then will be able to see what kind of character he and his government has when it comes to the big things. Now, Mr. Speaker, in a nutshell, this motion establishes what I think we as members of Parliament all do adhere to and should be adhering to in our behaviour, and it's what Canadians would expect from us. This motion establishes and reaffirms our commitment as members of Parliament to be accountable and to be transparent. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, as we're doing our duties, sometimes we break the rules without not doing it maliciously, and sometimes it is done knowingly. And I'll give you two examples, and whereby we as members of Parliament should be responsible for if we break those rules. Letters sent out to the general public is covered under our franking privileges. We're allowed to send letters out to our constituents. There had been some changes in the rules, Mr. Speaker, around if we could send letters to other people outside of our constituency. And so there was at a certain point during that transition when members of Parliament sent letters to people outside of their constituency and then found out afterwards that they actually were breaking the rules. And so those members of Parliament couldn't just say, oh, I'm sorry for breaking the rules, and say I didn't know those were the rules. They had to make it right. They had to personally write a check to the Receiver General in order to cover the costs, the taxpayers' costs, for when they broke the rules. It wasn't malicious, or it may have been malicious, but it was a breaking of the rules and amends had to be made. That's the right thing to do. Here's another example. A member of Parliament being given a free ticket, maybe 5 tickets for them and their family, to, let's say, an Elton John concert. And that member of Parliament then tells the House of Commons that they're going to be going on parliamentary business, and so they claim their plane trip, they claim their hotel, they claim their per diems. But then the House of Commons goes back and says, was that actually parliamentary business? And it's discovered that it wasn't. And in fact, they are taking an illegal gift. So doubly breaking the rules. Obviously, that member of Parliament would be asked to pay back the cost of the trip, the hotels, the per diem. That also is the right thing to do. I would say that example is probably a little bit more of a knowingly breaking the rules. 2 examples of where members of Parliament break the rules, and in breaking the rules use taxpayers' dollars, and then are asked to pay back those taxpayers' dollars. And dare I say, if they don't pay back those dollars, their wages are garnished. The House of Commons actually goes and says, you don't have a choice. You have to pay back those expenses. So this motion establishes that we all agree with that. And I would say on this side of the House, we all agree with that. I certainly hope that the Liberal members of Parliament as well would agree with that. Now, this leads me to the biggest example that we have thus far, and what I would say is the biggest breach, and that's the one that we've been talking about, as I said, for the last couple of weeks, and that's the Prime Minister's illegal holiday. This is actually the second time in less than 24 hours that I've risen to speak about it. It seems like more and more and more often, all we're talking about in this place is Liberals' conflict of interest, whether it's a Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, breaking of the rules, investigations, not recusing themselves from discussions. This is a Liberal pattern that just does not seem to end. Just last evening, actually, during the debate on Bill C-50, the Liberals' Cash for Access legislation, I pointed out to the House that the Liberals' very own bill has a pay the money back requirement when fundraisers stray outside of the rules. It's a sound principle and one that is mirrored in all kinds of regulatory and legal structure. But why is pay it back, whether it's to us as members of Parliament, the general public, in society, or even in Bill C-50, if you fundraise illegally, why is pay it back common? Why does it exist? Well, it's so that there is a meaningful incentive to encourage people to follow the law. It's that simple. And that's exactly what today's motion calls for. But regrettably, we're not simply talking about an abstract principle. We have a very real and a very serious case before us. The former Ethics Commissioner's report on the Prime Minister's winter trip to the Aga Khan's Island, better known as Billionaire Island. In her report, Mary Dawson said that the Prime Minister broke not one, not two, not even three, but four separate requirements of the Conflict of Interest Act. I do want to thank the quick-thinking member, our Leader of the Opposition. He was the one who submitted the original request for an investigation once the news broke, because we were asking the Prime Minister about the trip, and he constantly said it was a legal vacation and he was with somebody that he was a close friend with. Well, we now found out that actually he hadn't talked to the Aga Khan in over 30 years. So they were not close friends, and it was actually blatantly misleading Canadians. The Prime Minister knew very well that he had not seen or talked to the Aga Khan in over 30 years, but he got up day after day after day, and in fact, even he forced the House Leader to have to defend his illegal behavior. But in doing so, and this brings it back to the motion, Mr. Speaker, he incurred over $200,000 of taxpayers' dollars. Now, this is not a question of, well, he would have incurred those expenses anyway. If that was the question, Mr. Speaker, nobody would have to pay restitution, because everybody would have said, well, I would have you gotten a car anyway. So even if I stole a car and I didn't give it back, I would have needed a car anyway. Well, I would have used some money anyway, so I took somebody else's money, but I would have found a way to get money anyways. That is the most illogical defense I've ever heard, and I'm actually surprised that we're still hearing it from the Liberals. The fact is the Prime Minister broke the law, and in doing so, he actually forced the RCMP to be complicit in his breaking the law. I would be incredibly interested to know if anybody in the Prime Minister's office or part of his security told him, Prime Minister, we are all now breaking the rules by taking this illegal holiday and going on this helicopter. And if he was told, did he just say to them, oh, don't worry, the rules don't apply to me. I can do whatever I want because I am the Prime Minister, as he likes to refer to himself in the third person, even when he's outside of this place. It's quite remarkable to watch. Mr. Speaker, and instead of answering questions about this, instead of paying back the money, do you know what the Prime Minister was doing yesterday during question period? Signing autographs. The House Leader had to answer for his irresponsible, illegal behavior, and he sat there signing autographs. Mr. Speaker, not only is it shameful, this is embarrassing to watch. If the Prime Minister can't be accountable, honourable, and transparent in what is considered something small, and let's be honest, he has a family fortune. You know, we're not talking about somebody in poverty who can't afford to pay for something that they shoplifted. We're talking about somebody who brags about his family fortune. He can afford to pay the taxpayer back. Mr. Speaker, there is so much connected to this breach, including, as our leader talked about, when we have a government that is so disrespectful, so cold-hearted to our veterans, to our men and women in uniform. Would this Prime Minister please show leadership, be accountable, pay this back, and let's get on with do something good for Canadians and stop taking from them. Thank you.